is usually that, I already know that there's probably no one in this room that has, a couple of extra hours in the afternoon where you need something to do. Most of you work, 9, 10-hour days, and you can't keep up with it all. So here I am about to start talking about some strategic things that we would like to do, and the real issue is when are you going to have time to do this? Your plate's already full. So, but here's the question. If you're not doing best practices in procurement, if you're not the one doing it, who in your organization is going to do this stuff? Who's going to do these best practices if you don't? And the answer is no one. They just won't be done. And I know you would agree, most of the things we're talking about are important to do. They are best practices. So one of the first things that I have to do when I work with companies, especially in re-engineering a procurement department or a contracts department, I've got to help you get more time, or none of these things are ever going to see the light of day. Yeah, they sound good, we know they're good, we'd like to do them, but we don't have time to get them done. So we've got to come up with a way to get you more time, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. I borrowed another quote from a very, very famous economist, Peter Drucker. He says the following: he says the major problem is the confusion between effectiveness and efficiency. It stands between doing the right things and doing things right. And I can certainly understand after, and most of you can too, the focus in most organizations seems to be on the doing things right. Matter of fact, most of your KPIs are related to doing things right. And there's very few KPIs really related to, are we doing the right things? All right? Are we spending our time where we can be effective? Rather than, most of our KPIs relate to efficiency. How fast can you do something? How can you reduce the cycle time? Can you get more orders placed per month? Those are the things that we seem to be measured on, not on are we doing the right things. And in many cases, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you, we're doing the wrong things. We're taking valuable time at $290 an hour and spending it on things where we don't even produce anywhere near $290 an hour. He goes on to say this: yeah, I wish I'd been smart enough to say something so simple and yet so profound. But as I go around the world and I talk with all of you, and we see what your issues and problems are, wow, this one seems to be so much of your time is taken doing things that you should not be doing at all. And it keeps you from doing the best practices, which only you can do. So we've got a major issue here that we can resolve by some very relatively simple techniques that I'm going to show you. So what do we need? A way to identify the areas of effectiveness, or where can we really get big results, and a way to focus on them. And this is the way we can do it. There's many ways, but here's one of them. It's called the ABC analysis, or some of you know it as the 80-20 rule, or a Pareto analysis. It's been around for a while. Like how many years? Well, probably was developed in about the 1500s by an Italian mathematician. Here's what I know for everybody in this room. 80% of the money that you spend, you probably spend with less than 10% of the number of suppliers that you have. All right? In procurement, the 80-20 rule doesn't apply. It's more like 80-10. Actually, it's even, if you look at the CAPS data, 80% of the money that the company's reporting, 80% of the money is spent with about 6% of their suppliers. So if you look at the CAPS data, it would be really the 86% rule. But we'll settle with the 80-10. And we call this category where 80% of the spend, the top 80% of the spend, we call the A category spend. That's our, of course it's an important category because it's where all the money is. But of great concern to you and I is the C category. Let's take a look at it. 75% of the suppliers you deal with only adds up to 5% of your annual spend. We call that the C category. Now we do this ABC analysis both by suppliers and by what we buy. So another way for me to say this is, if you looked at 75% of the stuff that you buy, it only adds up to 5% of your annual spend. 75% of what you are spending money on add up the total value per year, and it's going to only add up to 5% of the total spend. Or 10% of what you buy, the top 10% of the things you buy or services that you buy will add up to 80% of your total spend. Now, I talked to you earlier about getters and buyers. The way that getters spend their time is this way. They line up with the second column. Getters spend their time like this. They line up with the percent of suppliers or the percent of parts. 75% of a getter's time is spent on these C categories, which only add up to 5% of the total spend. Ladies and gentlemen, if you cut the price of the C in half, it would be a round-off error for most of you. Or if you let the price of C's double or go up 50%, it would still be a round-off error for most of you. Yet, guess where our organizations are forcing us to spend a lot of our time? C's. Why? Because there's so many of them. And they're always in trouble. They make a lot of noise. They're late, they got quality problems, the paperwork's not right, the packing list is not right, the requisitioner changes their mind, we change the forecast, we increase it, we decrease it. All this stuff is happening on 75% of the stuff you're dealing with. And it's going to gobble up your day, and you won't have very much time left to focus where really all the money is. And by the way, most of your organizations are happy for you to focus on these C's, because you're taking care of something they don't want to take care of. So they've got you on it. And what's happening to the A's? You don't have time to work on those very much, so someone else is making the decisions on the A's, not procurement people. How does a procurement expert spend their time? Just the opposite. We spend our time focused in the A category, and only 5% of our time is spent on the C's. So what we try to do is, of course, the focus there is on cost reduction. But on the C's, we also have to focus, but there we're going to focus on process improvement. Change the process, change the procedures, change how we do things so that you have time, more time to spend on the A's. And for a lot of procurement departments, I get pushback from the procurement department themselves because they say, no, we must control these. And I say, why? And the problem is, normally I'd say, well, yeah, you need to control them, but not at the expense of not being able to do best practices on the eggs. So, you know, if you try to get too much control, what happens? What happens if you try to get too much control? You control nothing. You're so busy processing paperwork, you really don't control much of anything. So, the mantra for procurement, if you really want to get strategic and you want to really go to world class, the mantra for people in the supply management function and profession has to be this: get rid of your C's. You have to get rid of your C's. Now, I don't mean that literally, because they still have to come into the facility, but the way you go about acquiring them needs to change. And it needs to change so that you get them off your desk. So that we let end users get them, that we set up processes that make it easy for end users to get them. Somebody had mentioned earlier, we had just, one of the first things that many of you, a lot of you are doing this, is the procurement card. What was the idea behind the procurement card? Get rid of the C's. Generally, procurement card systems are restricted to a certain dollar level, you know, maybe $2,000 or $3,000, and are for non-repetitive procurements. If it's repetitive, procurement usually says, we'll set up a long-term agreement, we'll give you an order launching method. Hopefully it's through the internet in today's world. You know, you use the big box stores, the Staples and the Office Maxes for desktop kind of stuff. You use CW or somebody for that, for the simple IT stuff. You use Granger or any of these for MRO. You know, you set these things up, and hopefully you don't have to look at them again until the next contract renewal, but you've taken all that load off your desk. Folks, if you don't do this, I don't know what you can do to save yourself. You'll be dead. You can't get where you need to go unless you get rid of the C's. Now, I didn't say they weren't important. They can shut you down. So, and there are even some C's that you really are going to have to keep up at a high level because they have a strategic significance to you. But we usually discover that when we do the 4-quadrant matrix, you know, when we do the supplier segmentation or the categorization. We usually identify some C's that could really shut us down. Well, those will still get a lot of your attention. But for the most part, you want to identify them, identify the category, identify that they are a C, and then figure out how to get rid of it. So that it doesn't have to come across procurement's desk. So that you're not taking any time with it. Because to make the kinds of impact that you are capable of making, you've got to really be able to focus on those areas where all of the money is. So how do you do an ABC analysis? Is there any questions on this? There's probably nothing more important that I will tell you today than this. And if you don't do it, like I said, okay, you won't do it, but you're going to be dead. You just can't get unburied. They will just keep you that way. And you know, it's interesting, if you think your management knows about how to get rid of these C's, they don't. This is one of those things I have gotten rid of the C's every place I've ever been a manager, because otherwise I couldn't accomplish what I needed to accomplish. My buyers couldn't. But I couldn't tell them how to get rid of their C's. You, each individual, you know how to get rid of these. You know who the users are, you know who the suppliers are, you know how to set it up. But gosh, I've got places in the world that go out and get 3 competitive bids for a $100 item. Well, the absurdity of that just doesn't quit. And by the way, when they place that purchase order for that $100 item, it gets reviewed by 3 people and finally has to be signed off by the managing director on a $100 item. It will never make sense in the world for you to spend let's say your hourly rate's at $200. It will never make sense for you to spend an hour on something that costs $1,000. Because guess what you just did? If your hourly rate is $200 an hour and you spend an hour on something that costs $1,000, you just added 20% to the cost. We in procurement, we know better than that, and we know how to set up our processes and procedures so that the process should never cost anywhere near what the item we're trying to control costs. That would just be foolish from all aspects. So get rid of the C's. Make that your mantra. You know, everybody's got a screensaver. But let that be your screensaver as it's coming across the. Get rid of your. And it takes a lot of work. I'm not minimizing it. And by the way, one of the things I learned, I told you, a wise person learns from their mistakes. A very wise one learns from others. One of the things I learned, you can't just push off the work to another department. In other words, if your way of getting rid of the C is to create more work for somebody else, you're going to get such pushback, you won't be able to do it. You got to come up with a better way for the end user, yourself, and the whole organization. Otherwise, you get an amazing amount of pushback. Any questions on this? Well, I'm going to show you how to do it. Oops, my slide up there. That first slide says, take the spend, the total spend. When we do it the first time, we have to take the total spend, and we put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and we sort it in descending order. That's what that first step says. Sort in descending order, the total spend. Now, I've done this so many times. The first problem I run into is who's got the total spend. Guess what? Procurement usually doesn't have the total spend. You may have parts of the spend, but you may have the spend that you're dealing with, but very rarely does procurement have all of the spend. So where do you go if you don't have all of the spend? Fine. Accounts payable is the group that always has all of the spend. So you go to accounts payable, you get them to give you the last 12 months of spend. And you throw all of that into an Excel spreadsheet. Don't let them give you a report, or a printout or anything like that, because you're going to be mining this data for a long time, so you need to have it all in Excel. So that's what we've done here in this column. This is the annual spend for everything we buy. All right? Sorted in descending order. Now over here you see we will do it both ways. We will do it by the suppliers and we'll do it by part numbers. Usually when I start these, accounting doesn't have necessarily what we're buying. They just have the suppliers, and that's a good starting place. And then later we will have to begin to look at what are we buying from these suppliers so that we can do it in another way. But anyway, column number 3, descending order, annual dollars. By the way, only put the repetitive things. If you've got a one-time buy, it doesn't need to be here. Just take it out. If you buy a one-time capital equipment buy or facility buy, take it out. You don't need it there. Now, in this column, we're going to do something called the accumulated total of the annual dollars. All we're doing is accumulating what's in this column. So, of course, in the first row, there's nothing above the first row, so 22 equals 22. But once we get to the second row, now we're combining the sum of the first 2 rows. So 22 plus 14 equals 36. Then in the next row, we're combining the sum of the first 3 rows. So that works very easy in Excel. Just replicate the formula that says I'll take whatever's in this cell plus what's in the next cell in this column, and that'll be the sum. So when we get down to the bottom, this number better equal this number, or we did something wrong. Everybody okay? All right. Very simple to do in an Excel spreadsheet. Now in this column, the next to the last column, we are doing the accumulated total percent of the total annual dollars. So we took 22 and divided it by the total annual dollars to get So now we know that the very first item or the very first supplier is already 38% of the total spend. Then we divide 36 by 56.9. So now we see that in the first two items, we're already at 60% of the total spend. When I get to 80%, I draw a line. Everything above that line, they are A's. When I get to 95%, I draw another line. Everything between those two lines are what? B's. And everything below that line is a C. That's how simple it is to do an ABC analysis. Now we do this over and over and over again. You constantly are doing this ABC analysis. Because if you pick, you know, if you pick an if you pick something like, I'm just going to pick something out. You pick bearings. You see that bearing purchases are one of your A category spends. But as soon as you identify that category, you will do an ABC of bearings to see which are your A bearings, your B's, and your C's, and then you will be trying again to get rid of your C's. In other words, if you're looking at a group of suppliers, you say, well, here are all the suppliers I use for consulting. You know, I've got IT consulting as a category. Well, you'll take that IT consulting category and do an ABC of it. And you'll see who are my A suppliers and who are my C's, and can I get rid of as many of these C's as possible. So I had this is a couple of years ago, I was over in the Middle East, and one of the attendees said, Robbie, my boss attended your course last year, and he came back, and he was so excited about this ABC thing that he immediately did an ABC analysis. And do you know how he got rid of the C's? I said, no. He said, he gave them all to me. He said, so I'm not a C buyer. And I said, yes. And I said, well, what did you do then? He says, I don't know. I said, yes, you do. What would you tell him to do? Do an ABC of the C's, exactly. And again, focus on the A's for continuous improvement and savings, and focus on the C's to get rid of them. You know, in any way, and there's hundreds of ways to get rid of them. You're only limited by your creativity and how to get rid of C's, but there are just many, many ways to get rid of the C's. Any questions? Yes?
Just a comment, you know, naturally, your better performing suppliers, if you're doing it by supplier, will fall into the A category, because that's where the spend is. People are spending the money there for a reason. And what we've noticed is, looking at different categories and subcategories, that the C's are typically, could be one-off, could be just a couple of people using them in the company or whatever. One of our strategies is to consolidate and take those C's and what we're buying from those C's and push it up the chain.
Absolutely. My advice is try to get this model, this philosophy ingrained into the entire organization so that everybody is working and doing the same thing. So that one of the things you don't, if you're taking off C's, you don't want to have other people adding them right back on again, for example. So we do that through our qualification procedure or our approved vendor list or supplier list. We do all those mechanisms to try to keep C's from popping back up. But yes, the whole concept has to be, I don't want C suppliers. Now, there is a problem that occurs for many of you. I'm going to walk in front of the projector, but that's, there is an issue that many of you have to deal with. That ABC I just showed you, guess what? Suppliers are doing the same thing. Your suppliers do the same ABC, but theirs do what? They do their breakdown based on sales.
And cost of sales.
Well, in this case, they don't look, they're not actually putting the cost of sales down, but it's still related exactly to what you just said. They say that sales, they say 80% of their sales will come from number of customers 20%. 20% of their customers bring in 80% of their sales. So it's right where you said, and it's 15-15. And what's left? 5% of their sales come from 65% of their customers. Here's another mantra in procurement. You never want to be a C customer. You don't want to be a C customer, because here's what we teach your suppliers. You cannot make money on a C customer. They will just cost you money. And we also tell them, make sure you devote your resources on A customers, because you cannot lose an A customer. They're too hard to replace. You never want to lose an A customer. Never lose an A customer is what we tell your suppliers. So put all of your resources to make sure you're taking care of your A customers. We don't care about the C's. Matter of fact, we tell them to do what with their C's? Get rid of them, because you cannot make money on a C customer. So get rid of your C's. Now here's where some of you have a major problem. It's your A spend, and it's there, and you're their C customer. And I imagine everybody in this room has a few of those. If not, maybe sometimes you have many of those. That's where the problem occurs. It's your A category spend, and you're a C customer. Well, that is a nightmare. And if you can do anything to fix it, you know, we said we need to be sitting down with our executive management, discussing strategic issues for the future. That needs to be on that list. Where are we a C customer and they're our A supplier? Because when this shortage comes, which I am confident is going to come, you're going to be out of luck. I already know you will not be able to get your material at that point. So you've got to already be developing strategies to deal with that issue. Now, the whole world's in an economic slump right now, so I don't know when it'll be. Could be 5 years from now, I don't know. If we don't get the European situation fixed, we could be right back in another recession soon. I don't know. But we do know that that potential is there. So what we generally do with these, if we're a C customer, we do exactly as you said. We start to try to get, you know, try to maybe redesign, try to move that, try to combine it with something else. I've done that, a lot of you have, where you take a component and instead of buying it in components, you either buy it as a bigger assembly, or I don't know about you, I used to buy kits just for this reason. You know, I didn't want, you've got 40 different fastener items going into one assembly, and we're buying 40 purchase orders, 40 receipts, 40 accounts payable, 40 inventory numbers being tracked. Let's just put it in one kit and let the distributor put it together in the kit, so we only have one item. Increases the value of the item, and you know, could change the dynamics of the ABC relationship. Any questions? Other questions? Can you do? Yes.
We had, in my youth, I was in a plant that made reinforced gum tape. And two things. One, when paper, we had a top sheet, fiberglassing on, and a laminate, and a bottom sheet, and they were all brought together, and the fiberglass was woven into the big jumbo roll before it was slit. And the purchase order, I never understood it. This was back when I had a full head of hair.
No, that could have never
I
been.
wasn't too bright, and they put down as the price as had. And I never understood what as had meant. And then the other thing was, when they shipped it out, the plant was in Brooklyn, New York, right on the East River. And the assistant traffic manager said, they like to use all the different trucking companies to make everyone happy. And there again, I never understood why you wanted to make everybody happy and not be an important customer to just a couple.
Well, your question was appropriate. You want to be the important one. You want to be, and that takes sometimes strategies, that takes planning, that takes, you're going to have to, in some of your cases, you're going to have to move from where you are, the suppliers you've been using maybe for years, and, because here's one of my worries, when the shortages start to come, your small suppliers are out of luck, they're out of business. And there's no way not to have that happen. That's what's happened every time in the past, where we've had big inflation, big inflationary period. There were times in the United States when I was a buyer, we were seeing 18% per year in escalation. And that was knocking people out all over the place because then people were being put on allocation and the small people couldn't get anything. So these are strategies you need to be looking at even now when we don't have the problem. Being strategic means that we are proactive, and in some cases we're now trying to even be pre-active. In other words, let's go take an action before the problem ever gets to us. Any other questions on this? Can you do this? Yes, it's not hard to do. You just have to get the data. Sometimes getting the data is the biggest challenge. Once you get the data, it's not difficult at all. So here's an example of what this begins to look like. You can see in this particular company, the vendor names are just numbers for confidentiality, but you can see when we got to the 80%, that's when the ABC classification changed. And when we got to the 95%, we see that it changed again. And if you look at a pivot table that was created from this database, you can see that the A category spend 25 million, only 160 suppliers. Look at the C's. Over 1,000 suppliers, and we're only spending $1.7 million. This was not even anything close to a purchasing department. It was 100% a getting department. And partly because of this situation. Over 1,000 suppliers, and you're only spending $1.7 million in spend. By the way, this company, one of the biggest problems, they have way too many suppliers. But guess what? We find that true of most companies in the world. You've got way too many suppliers. And that just makes your job that much more difficult. We say that a good best practice is to reduce the number of suppliers you have by 25% per year. 25% per year is the best practice, reducing that quantity. Now, that doesn't mean, somebody mentioned this earlier, that doesn't mean that in some categories you need to have more suppliers. So that's not, in other words, every category of spend should be analyzed to see, do we need more or do we need less? So don't take this as a blanket statement that I apply to everything. No, you have to look at each. In some you have way too many suppliers, and others you probably need to try to develop a few more. So I would like for you to take a few minutes and do this exercise. It's in your manual. It's on the next page. And my apologies, I owe all of you an apology. I only noticed last night that I did not get page numbers on your manual. Now, I could have just hoped nobody would notice, but I noticed, and it's my fault. So I apologize. So one of the things that you can do when you get home is number all your pages. But there is a table of contents in the very beginning that does reference all the page numbers. I just, in the heat of getting this out, I just forgot to put that on. Can't even blame an administrative assistant or someone because I don't have one. And I'm not like Philip, can't blame everything on the government. I have to take the blame.
Yes, you can.
Thanks, Joe.
We'll accept your blame.
So just take a minute, I'm glad to help. But everything you need is right on that page. It tells you the percentages to use and gives you the amounts. You'll do it twice, do it once for the supplier ABC, and then you'll do another ABC for the things being bought. So just use those ratios. Plug in the numbers.
See, someone.
Fill in the blanks. You don't have a calculator? Do it along. Robi, you can do it along. Well, you can do multiply 8 times 12. In other words, as soon as somebody tells you what their spend is, like in this case, it's 120 million, what is 80% of that? That will be my A's. So 80% of 120 million is the amount of total spend in millions. As soon as somebody tells you how many suppliers they have, you know that 10% of those would be A's. So in this case, we have 400 suppliers. 10% of that would be 40. So from there on, you can do both of those tables. Everybody okay? Need some help? Well, you can look at the person next to you and think they know what they're doing. So let's see what the answer is. Well, we use, by the way, let me point out something to you. The 80-15-5, that's fixed. That's the empirical model. If you're taking your CPSM exam, what you need to know to answer whatever question, there's going to be a question on it related to the ABCs, and what they are expecting you to know is this 80-15-5. That is the empirical part, that's fixed. This is different for each one of you, okay? 80% of your spend may be 4% of the suppliers, or 12% of what you buy. But the way the model runs, you're trying to determine the top 80%. That's what's significant. So, the ABC for the suppliers, we have $120 million, 80% of that, 96. We have 400 suppliers, 10% of that is 40. And we can complete the rest of the ABC by using these percentages to classify the suppliers and the spend in millions. Now when we go to the ABC for the items, the spend's the same. We haven't changed the spending amount. So now the question is, but we have 6,000 unique items. So 10% of those 6,000 unique items is 600 are in the A category. And you can see the balance, what would happen down here. So we have $6 million, but we're spending that on 4,500 items. Everybody okay with this now? You'll get very accustomed to using it as your thinking begins to just go that way. Whenever, you know, one of the things that used to happen in my groups, that comment was always going around, that's a C, let's just get rid of it. Don't spend any time, let's just get rid of it somehow. By the way, you know one of the ways that we got rid of C's? You'll be surprised. One of my ways of always getting rid of C's is to buy a year's worth. No, we are not going to buy 2 months' worth, we're not going to buy 3 months, we're going to buy a year's worth. Well, now, we had some rules, couldn't take too much space. We had to, whatever quantity we could fit within the space allotted for that item is how much we bought if it was a C. Couldn't have a short shelf life. And we did check with engineering to make sure they weren't going to change something halfway through the year. Those were the 3 rules. Those were the only rules. We said procurement has the authority to change the quantity to an annual quantity if it meets those 3 criteria. All right? So about half of what we bought, we could actually buy a year's worth. And the benefit to that was amazing. Because, yes, we were going to add some inventory on the C's. And usually that's where the pushback came from the CFO. But as soon as we showed the CFO the cost savings in buying much bigger quantities, not having to pay minimum ship rates, getting a full shipping quantity, and you know what turned the financial part? We only have to pay for an invoice, we only have to do an invoice once a year, not every month or every 3 months. And the receiving department, the load in the receiving department dropped drastically because they weren't receiving all these items every 2 or 3 months. And the warehouse people loved it because now they weren't having to put away that often. And you know who loved it the most? The operations manager. Because what happened is, if something only comes in once a year, ladies and gentlemen, it can only be late how many times? Once. So I ended up getting lots of support from operations in this concept because it meant a lot of luck, many, many less stock outs. And again, if that item gets continued, yes, there's going to be some write-off, and you'll wish you hadn't done it, but the fact is the savings that resulted from doing it will probably well offset what you lost by writing it off. Throw it away. Yes? The 3 criteria were, number 1, it has to fit in the same space. or however, I'm gonna order however much I can order that will fit in the space allotted for it. And I don't know about you all, but in most of our factories, we have, big storage systems, and there was a cube there for it that identified what was supposed to go there. As long as you fill that up, you could order that much. That was criteria number one. Number two, couldn't have a short shelf life. By the way, don't do this with the batteries. All right, especially before Christmas. And number three was check with engineering to make sure there's not going to be a design change at some point. Those were the only three criteria. And what we had done is we had gone into our part master files. Again, this is something everywhere I went. Let's go put this identifier in our part master file. On parts, we will identify every part as an A, B, or C based on annual spend, not on the individual value of the item. This is based on annual dollars spent on this item. So some of you have an A, B, C, but it's usually on the value of that item. No, this is on the annual spend of that item. And we took every supplier and classified them as an A, B, C in the supplier master file. Again, based on the annual spend of that supplier. So it was easy for us when an item came up. It was a quick look to say, wait, this is a C item. Here's what we're going to do with it. Good question. Thank you. Any other questions? You can do this. Now, let me add one more thing to doing this. If you really want to do this well, then we're going to take you to this next thing that is, again, a pretty basic and a best practice, and that is that you have a hierarchical coding system, a purchasing one, the way that procurement thinks, not the way engineering or maintenance or marketing or finance thinks. This is the way procurement thinks. And what I'm showing you here is just an example of a 3-level coding system. So what did we do? Well, these are just screenshots from one we actually did. This company, here's the major spend categories to the outside. We just set up a very simple alpha coding system that's going to consist of 3 levels. You're looking at the level 1 first. This is the high level hierarchical coding system. Over here, these numbers happen to be telling you how many sub-levels there are going to be. I'm going to show you that in a minute. So, we just basically took the entire spend and we set an alpha code. Don't try to match the alpha code to the first letter of the description. It won't work. It'll work for about 5 minutes, and then you'll be crazy trying to find it. So don't even try to go there. It's just by accident that some of these things lined up. But notice we took the entire spend. Ladies and gentlemen, you want to know the entire spend of the organization. Because there's a lot of things procurement's not involved in where there are significant spends that your skills and talents are desperately needed. A lot of times it's just the human resources director or the marketing director. They're off making commitments, spending money, signing contracts, and they don't have the skill sets to be doing that. You could add a break. So we want to see what all that is. So now you're looking at it at the level 1. I'm going to take you to level 2. Whoops. Okay, you can see the little bit of the C there. I need to bring this in just a little bit. Well, then I lose the other side. I'll bring it way down. I'll spread this back out and move on. Okay, so you see the C, there's my level 1 code, communications. Now we broke that up into about 7 sub-levels. So we have a level 2 code. So if I want to know how much this organization is spending related to telephone, I sort the entire database for CG. The entire database will be sorted for CG. And I can see the annual spend. There is the annual spend related to telephone. Or I can sort at 2 levels for any of probably about 300 different categories. Now, what if I even want to take it one more? So here I've taken the communications, there's the 7 level 2s, but I've even taken this to a level 3. So if I want to know how much money is spent related to, let's say, repair and service of telephones, I sort the whole database for C, G, F, and I have my total annual dollar spend, and I can decide which, should I be paying any attention to this at all? Is it a C or is it a, what is the spend category? And who should I assign it to and where should it be in my structure? What you're looking at right now is a pivot table that was run on a spend. You can see we ran this one at the level 1 code. So we have here about, I don't know, 12 or 13 level 1 spend categories. You can see there's my A, B, C spends. Here you can see this company spent, they had 24,000 different items that they bought, spending $90 million a year on 24,000 different items. If you look at their ABC analysis, you can see 80% of that spend was on 9.3% of the items. Look at their C's. 5% of the spend was on 65% of what they bought. You can see that represented in the C column. So 16,000 out of the 24,000 were C category items. The total spend was only 4.5 million out of the 90 million. Now, this was a typical classic getting department. Had 8 buyers, they were absolutely inundated. Because the CFO, they were having cash flow problems. The CFO said, you may never buy more than a month's worth of anything. Well, can you just imagine what that would do? You're talking like 24,000 orders a month. Well, 8 buyers can't really handle that. They weren't very automated either. So, it was a nightmare. So what would be the first thing you would tell them to do? You're the consultant. You've got to fix this operation. What would be the first thing you would tell them to go do? All right, which one? Which one? Which commodity? YM. Yeah. Look at how many. There's 7,000 items in commodity M that only make up $1.7 million. So, yes, the very first thing you see the value, once you start looking at the numbers, the data in this way, it begins to give you a quick focus. It lets you be very effective very quickly. So yes, and the first thing I told them to do, buy a year's worth. The CFO went ballistic. But we showed them that not only were we, yes, we were going to increase the inventory on the C's, and we even showed them what dollar amount that would be, but we said it's going to give us more time to work on the A's, and we'll reduce that inventory, so then probably the net effect, well, we'll get the inventory down, actually. Now, we went, so commodity M was first, then we went to the commodity C. We went to the big numbers to get rid of them. And then, after we did that, where would you tell them to go focus now? We've gotten rid of the C's. Where do we want to go focus now? Now I want to go focus where? In my A's, because I want to start saving some money. I want to make a big impact very quickly. So where am I going to go? Which commodity? L, yeah, because that's the biggest spend, $22 million, and there's only 50 items. So we took the top buyer, the highest competency buyer, and we assigned him to commodity L, but he was not an expert in L, so we brought in a consultant for actually it was a 3-day consulting job. It cost us about $6,000 to have this consultant in for 3 days, but that consultant was an expert in commodity L, and came up with about 2% savings in just 3 days. Just picking up what we call the stuff on the floor. the low-hanging fruit. Was just obvious things that, because the expertise was not there to really know how to do this, but this is what this consultant had done his whole life. So it was quite a dramatic story that occurred relatively quick. It took us about 3 weeks to get the data into this format. They didn't have an ABC, they didn't have the spend profile, and they didn't have a hierarchical commodity system. Hopefully you'll see you really need that to really make all this work, because then you get to begin to look at things like this. Notice what happened. This is just another example of a first level pivot table of a spend profile. So we're doing the spend profile. Where I drew this line, everything below that was C. So again, basically what we said is, hey, procurement, you got to focus up here. Down here, get rid of it. And guess what? Look at one of the items, facilities and grounds. I took over a procurement department. It didn't look exactly like that, but it was relatively close. After about 4 or 5 months, I realized we bought, we were the purchasing department, so all the facilities stuff had to come through us too. There had to be a purchase order for everything. And of course, my buyers, guess who they were constantly fighting with? It's the facilities and the maintenance people. Because they all are very strong-willed, they know exactly what they want, they know how they want it, they know the right suppliers, they're all buddies with them, And I was watching this going on, and I said, Robbie, use your analysis. Like I said, this wasn't the exact same one, but basically it looked not that dissimilar to this. And of course, what did I say? I went to the facilities manager and I said, you know what? We're constantly in battles with each other. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn all procurement over. I'm going to authorize you to make procurements related to facilities. I'm going to give you that authorization. I'll put it in writing, because I was the only one in the organization authorized to commit to the outside. So I said, I'm going to delegate that authority to you. I said, and then we're going to conduct a 2-hour training program for your people. Everybody that's dealing with a supplier, we're going to give you a 2-hour training program. And I said, we'll do that as often as you want us to. But once we've done that, you're on your own. We'll give you a purchase order forms. You do what? I said, but you take care of it. We're out. You know what? It was almost like this big weight was lifted off the procurement department's shoulders. Did it cost us some money? Yes, I imagine it did, because they're not as diligent and as skilled as we were. But guess what our folks were able to do then? What do we want them to do? Focus on where the big money is. The money was not there to justify all the aggravation and time that we were spending on it. So it's back to your TCO kind of concept, total cost of ownership. So everything below that line, you should get rid of.
Are you saying that they actually entered POs? Because
Yes.
that's segregation of duties in our company.
I know. Well, again, when you start changing the procedures and processes, you create procedures and processes specifically directed at certain spend categories. It's like, I don't know if your company uses procurement cards. Well, you had to change some rules there to get that to happen. There had to be a change in the rules. Because now you don't have buyers making those commitments. You have end users, who's the actual one who says there's a need, is also the one who's actually making the commitment, and who's also the one at the end of the month that says, I received it. So there's a lot of things that can happen in our companies if we just want them to. And a lot of them that we're doing would not be justified for us doing it if we really sat down and put the cost of doing it. What is the cost of a procedure or a process? If we start looking at that, and that's what you're there for. You're there to make these kinds of judgments. Do I need to control something where the cost of the control is more than what I'm trying to control? Those are your judgments. You have to. Now here you just see the same thing being done at a 3-level. You can see that at a certain point where after the yellow line, just get rid of it. Let's just figure out how to come up with an automated, mechanized way that people can get the job done and not have to come to procurement to do it. Or set up long-term agreements and set the release system up so that it doesn't have to come through procurement. Any questions? Yes, you will have to change some procedures and some processes. You're going to have to change some basic thinking. Right? But if you want to become strategic, these are the kind of things you're going to have to do. Otherwise, the seas will keep you buried. They will just keep you down in that hole.
Does the level of the hierarchy have anything to do with helping or hindering your analysis? Because we're going to be moving from a 4-level hierarchy for procurement to a 1 level. What do we give up by not being able to go down 3 or 4 levels?
You give up the data mining that lets you sort of focus in on areas of opportunity. So now there's this really big level, and certainly there are sub-levels to it, but you don't really get to see them without a lot of work. If you set it up automatically to break it, I just gave you a 3-level example. There's a lot of companies that do 4-level. All right. I found that even some of the most sophisticated companies I've dealt with can do it in 4 levels. So, and never need to go beyond that. But don't. You know, if you go to 1 level, you would be back at trying to decide, what am I going to do with something that looks like this? You know, how much, you know, yeah, I'm buying a lot of MRO, maintenance, repair, operating, but what kind of MRO am I spending? Yeah, I really do want to see that. I need to have that breakdown. You know, if I'm talking about equipment, tools, and capital, I need to take a look at that. Because using these hierarchical is the way I organize my department. It may be the way I do buyer assignments. All of that can come from a good understanding of what am I spending it on. So I would highly push back on going from 4 levels to 1. I'd fight that very hard.
They're much bigger than we are.
Huh?
They're much bigger than we are.
Well, I don't care. I like to create the wages. And if you're not creating the wage, who's going to do it for you? It's one of the reasons why so many of you don't have a good purchasing system. Nobody stood up and said, here's what we have to have. You know, this is our specification. This is our statement of work. And IT, you better make sure we have this stuff. Well, nobody stood up and really pounded on the table for that. So don't go backwards in terms of having your analytical abilities. That would be just the absolutely wrong direction to go. And if nothing else works, use me as the head. You know, say Robbie says that'd be crazy. That would be going in from best practice to worst practice in one fell swoop. By the way, it'll get me frustrated. I don't want to hear the details. So, any other questions?